Okay, so my name's Austin, and this is my next video in the series on why I love the novel Infinite Jest. And this is the third video in which I will discuss the Boston AA meeting that occurs between pages 343 and 379 in the novel. In the first two videos about this AA meeting, I started to explicitly develop the idea that it's critical for a human being to learn how to be honest with themselves, and how the novel gives an example of this with a series of characters having to figure out a way to be honest with themselves in order to achieve long-term sobriety. But I believe whether or not a person's an addict, this is an important lesson for any human being to learn. Something that I started to stumble upon in the first two videos without realizing it, and certainly without explicitly stating it, is that although a person can't choose to just one day start being honest with themselves, right? This isn't a switch that can be flipped, right? That even though that choice can't be made, there are a series of smaller and simpler decisions a person can make that will eventually lead to them getting to that point or approaching that point. Within the context of that novel, or within the context of the novel, the simplest example of that is addicts choosing to keep coming back, right? That is a rather simple decision that can be made. It can be difficult for a person to make it, but it is a simple choice to keep coming back, to just go to one more AA meeting, right? This is a simple choice. Similarly, that there's a number of series of even smaller decisions within each meeting that follow the same mindset, right? A person can choose to sit in the front row of a meeting the way that all of the staffers at the Ennet House recommend every newcomer do, right? They say, go up and sit in the front row. This is a simple choice that a person can make. It's not complicated. It might be hard to do. It may be very uncomfortable, but overall, it is a simple choice. And along this idea, the fact that a person may not be able to choose to be honest with themselves immediately, there are decisions they can make, right? In this video, I will discuss one of those decisions, which is, when a person gets up to share at one of these meetings, they can choose how they tell their own story. And more specifically, they can choose which elements are and aren't included in the story they tell. The example that this novel gives is by comparing the stories of the final two speakers at the AA meeting, where the second to last speaker is a girl who was adopted into a foster home, who eventually ran away and became a stripper and then started to abuse substances, while the final speaker is a woman who gave birth to a stillborn baby in a motel room after she had abused substances all throughout the pregnancy. And these two stories are compared to one another, and more importantly, the way that the stories are told are compared to one another, where, the one told by the runaway foster kid is described as a story of causality, whereas the story told by the mother of the stillborn infant is described as one of responsibility, right? This is the difference, causality and responsibility. And if you were to go through and read these two sections of the book, which are close to being back to back between pages, I think 370 and 379, if you go through and read the story told by the runaway foster kid, you will see a series of words being italicized, like because and forced and things like that, are italicized to explicitly show that this person is telling a story of one event causing another. Whereas if you read the story of the pregnant woman, if you read the entire story, that you'll see that she says nothing other than the events that happened and how she felt as it was going on, right? Even at the end of the story, it says, Gately tries not to think. Here is no cause or excuse. It is simply what happened. So the second to last speaker's story features elements of not just what happened, but A caused B, and the decisions that she made because of the things that were going on. Whereas the final story is only the events that happened and how the woman felt. And the, I suppose, value of these two forms of stories and how much they can help or hurt the person telling them is indicated by the novel, or is indicated in the novel by showing the way that this fictional AA audience responds to each of the speakers. After the runaway foster kid, the audience responds by the way this description reads in the book is, as she's telling what she sees as ideological truth, even though the monologue seems sincere and unaffected and at least a B+ on the overall AA story lucidity scale, faces in the hall are averted and heads clutched and postures uneasily shifted in empathetic distress at the look what happened to poor me invitation implicit in the tale. The talk's tone of self-pity itself less offensive than the subcurrent of explanation. An appeal to exterior cause that can slide in the addictive mind so insidiously into excuse that any causal attribution is in Boston AA feared, shunned, punished by empathic distress. Right? A story of causality is met with an audience that feels distressed, as opposed to a story of responsibility, which says, this final speaker is truly new, ready. All defenses have been burned away. Smooth-skinned and steadily pinker at the podium, her eyes squeezed tight, she looks like she's the one that's the infant. The host white flaggers pay this burnt public husk of a newcomer the ultimate Boston AA compliment. They have to consciously try to remember, even to blink as they watch her, listening, identifying without effort. Right? So it's the completely opposite response. And I think the idea of having this fictional AA audience respond to these two speakers in this way is to suggest that people who have found a way to improve their lives, people who have found a way to be honest with themselves, would be distressed by a story of causality because they would know how that way of thinking has hurt them, how that way of viewing their own life offense has hurt them. That it wasn't until they learned how to tell stories in the way that the final speaker did that they could learn how to put the pieces together in order to achieve long-term sobriety, right? It wasn't until they learned how to tell a story only in terms of the events that happened and how they felt that they learned how to be honest with themselves. And so they will feel distressed when they see a person who hasn't put this together yet. And so, towards the beginning of this video, I said that there are certain things a person can choose to do. And I said that a person can choose how they tell their story. And what I mean when I say that is a person can choose to tell a story in which everything they say is true, right? When you look at the person who's telling their story in terms of causality, right? A caused B, led to C causing D, right? They are not guaranteed to be right about any of those things. In fact, they are probably wrong, because trying to establish causality in a human life is excessively complicated, and it's something that no human being is really capable of, right? So when they say A caused B, they are probably wrong, and they're saying something that probably isn't true. Whereas when a person tells a story only in terms of what happened and how they felt, these two things are truths, right? They don't require a knowledge beyond what a human being is capable of. It is simply the events that happened and how the person felt. No linkage between them, just what happened and how the person felt. These things are guaranteed to be true. And when it comes to learning how to be honest with oneself, I believe it's critical to tell stories that only feature elements that are true. And I think this section of the novel really emphasizes that. And overall, I think these two stories back to back, are the most incredibly written part of the novel. And I really, really love this part. Anyways, that's all.